Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel, and on today's video I thought we'd talk about my experience making custom Joy-Cons. Well, this weekend has definitely been an interesting weekend as I went ahead and I put myself up to the task of making my own custom Joy-Cons, and I thought I'd just share the experience with you guys as well as give you 5 different steps that will make your life easier if you're considering doing this project as well. So the very first thing you got to be able to do if you want to do this project is be able to assemble and disassemble Joy-Cons without a problem. And this is something that can be a little bit complicated and intimidating your first couple of times, but the truth of the matter is it's actually a very simple process as long as you follow the steps. There are several different tutorial videos out there on how to do this, and so I don't have too much video of me doing it personally for you guys because there's a lot of other YouTubers out there who go in a lot more depth than I ever would be able to go into about this. But you have to be comfortable with disassembling your Joy-Cons and being able to put them back together. One thing to know is you will need a tri-wing screwdriver in order to open up the back of the Joy-Cons, and those cost about 10 bucks on Amazon. Actually, you can find a full repair kit for your Nintendo Switch for about 10 bucks on Amazon. So if you got Amazon Prime, that free 1 to 2 day shipping, you get it in and then you're ready to go. Alright, so now you got your Joy-Cons disassembled. Well, obviously now we just need to spray paint them. A lot of tutorials out there about customizing your own Joy-Cons recommends that you sand the paint off. This kind of depends on what type of spray paint you're using. Me personally, I went with a double coat spray paint that specifically said that I would not need to sand down whatever I did. And I was a little skeptical about this, but it actually worked really well. So in my personal recommendation, it's much easier to not sand the Joy-Cons, especially because it's incredibly easy to sand unevenly on a thin piece of plastic like this and potentially ruin your Joy-Cons, like I did with this very first set here. So what ended up happening here was on the left front side of the Joy-Con, I accidentally hit it a little bit too hard with the blast from the spray paint, and it actually moved on me, causing an uneven coat of paint on the front side. And as a result, I immediately picked it back up, took it back in, and went to go wipe off the paint on it. This was a huge mistake that ended up ruining the left Joy-Con for me. I couldn't quite get it off in time because spray paint dries incredibly fast, and so I ended up basically having uneven coats from then on out. Plus, in an attempt to fix this, I went ahead and I sanded the paint off the Joy-Con anyways, which then, like I said, caused the Joy-Con shell to kind of have an uneven coat of paint, as well as made it so that my base color that I had on there, the gray, was no longer the same gray as my other Joy-Con, causing the paint to not dry the same color as the other one. So I basically had 2 different shades of gold going on. It took me multiple coats of paint and actually repainting the Joy-Con gray to fix the shade to make it the same color again, or at least close enough that I wouldn't notice the difference. But that also was a mistake because at this point I had multiple coats of paint on this left Joy-Con, which actually had blocked the buttonholes for the controller. And so when I went to go to reassemble the Joy-Con, I accidentally kept popping the paint back up because the paint was inside of the holes for the joystick and for the D-pad and for the minus button and for the camera capture button, which caused it to just look bad. So I went back through, I sanded the paint out of the holes, and when I went to go put the buttons back in, it just didn't look as clean as it needed to. It doesn't look bad, it just doesn't look very clean for a perfectionist like me. Whereas the right side and the other 3 parts of the Joy-Con shells turned out absolutely fine, turned out absolutely beautiful. So this brings me to step 2. Have 2 sets of Joy-Con shells. And what I mean by that is if it's your first attempt at doing custom Joy-Cons, you're probably going to mess up somehow, some way, in some way that you could have never foreseen on your first set of Joy-Con shells. And so if you go on to Amazon and you buy a $20 set of shells, they're not very expensive. You can even buy the white set of shells that make it a little bit easier to paint on. But if you buy an extra set of shells, you've got that backup set, and that way you can practice on the first one. And if your practice one goes well, that's great. You get 2 sets of awesome custom Joy-Cons. But if it goes wrong, then you didn't just break your $80 Joy-Con shells and have to go buy new Joy-Cons. I kind of covered this with the mistakes as well, but step 3 is when you go to put on the paint, do as few of coats as possible. I actually was not satisfied with how these gold ones turned out. I'm a little bit of a perfectionist. I knew that those little buttonholes would drive me insane where I made those mistakes, and so I went ahead and bought myself a whole new set of Joy-Cons and painted them GameCube controller purple. And as you can see, this coat turned out so much better because what I did is I learned from my past mistakes and I didn't put on multiple coats of paint. I went ahead and I kept it as few of coats as possible. It took me a total of 4 layers on the Joy-Con that I made very, very thin. I went ahead and I did 2 of the color and I did 2 of the clear coat, and that was it. And they turned out beautifully. It turned out so much better than the gold Joy-Cons. So step 4 kind of got mentioned in step 3. I'm kind of like getting ahead of myself each step here, but make sure you have a clear coat for your Switch. After putting on this beautiful custom layer of paint, you know, you're going to be holding them with your hands. Hands get sweaty over time when you're playing long term in handheld mode or in docked mode for that matter. And so you want to make sure that you go ahead and you put some protection on that and you put some clear coat on it. You know, I went ahead and I picked a flat clear coat because for whatever reason, purple spray paint only comes in gloss, and I hate gloss on a controller because it just is a fingerprint magnet, right? And so as a result, I went ahead and I chose a flat clear coat, which actually took my gloss and changed it to flat so that it's a nice matte color, and I love it. So I guess another piece of advice I have about that is whatever finish you want, you got to make sure the clear coat is that finish. The paint doesn't matter quite as much because the last thing you're going to put on is this clear coat. And step 5. Step 5 is potentially the most important thing when it comes to making these custom Joy-Cons. It's where I made my mistake twice in a row, and it's where you most likely will make a mistake as well if you're not careful. Give your Joy-Cons enough time to dry. I am an extremely impatient person, and so I went ahead and I gave myself an hour between each coats, and for the most part it felt dry. But what I failed to consider was even though it felt dry, the paint hadn't fully cured yet. Exhibit A would be from the back side of those gold Joy-Cons. One thing I did not show you was that there was a point where I was testing to see if it was dry, and I accidentally scooped an entire layer of paint off the edge of the Joy-Con, and I had to repaint over it, which led it to be uneven, and you can see that. Exhibit B comes with this set of Joy-Cons because I almost have a perfect set of Joy-Cons here. I almost did it completely perfectly, except I made one critical error. Instead of letting the clear coat dry overnight, and instead of being patient, I went ahead and only let it dry for about an hour and a half. And when I was reassembling the Joy-Con, I went ahead and I put my thumb right about up here on this thin layer here, and I left a giant fingerprint there. And it's not a big deal. You can't see it unless you're looking for it, but it's still something that kept this otherwise perfect set of Joy-Cons that I did from being completely perfect. So I can't emphasize step 5 enough. Even when you think the Joy-Cons are completely dry after an hour or two, even when they feel completely dry, have a little bit more patience, especially after you've just finished everything and it's all perfect and you know it's perfect. Just be safe. Let it dry overnight. Give it that time to cure before reassembling it, because you don't know if the paint is fully cured unless you've fully given it that 24 hours to do so. Well, there you guys have it. There are some of my steps and advice and some of the processes I went through. What do you think of these Joy-Cons? I think they turned out pretty cool. I'm actually looking to buy myself some gray buttons to go along with it and a green and red button for this so that it even looks more like a GameCube controller than it already does. Are you going to attempt at any point doing custom Joy-Cons? I understand that, you know, Joy-Cons are $80 and a lot of people probably don't want to take that risk of breaking their Joy-Cons and having to buy brand new ones. But for you brave souls out there, let me know how your own custom Joy-Con projects have turned out. If you like this video, make sure you hit that like button, and if you're new to the channel, hit that subscribe, and we'll see you all in the next video.